It's the Awake Space podcast. I'm Laurie Rivers, your host, here to help you with some inspiration to get those aspirations out into the world. This week, it's going to be an interesting week. We've got some interesting astrology again. I know. It's already been a long decade, but just wait, there's more. This week, we're talking about media literacy with a wonderful guest and patron, Carri Karhoun. Amazing conversation talking about the media and its drive to kind of divide us and cause outrage and what we can do about it. I always love to empower you here. And since we have Jupiter stationing direct this week, it's probably a good idea to have some conversations about how not to get as outraged, because it is a way to dwindle our energy. Also, going to be going through the headlines as always. Remember, those are potentials. What else are we going to do? Oh, yeah, it's Black History Month. So we're looking at Angela Davis's chart. If you're a patron, you'll get the video presentation of that up as a separate segment. And at the end of the podcast, I talk about one of America's first astrologers, Benjamin Banneker. Yeah, he was an astrologer, not just an astronomer. And I talk about that every single week throughout February. We're going to be talking about historical figures and celebrating Black History Month, because just like wearing a mask, that shouldn't have to be federally mandated. That too, we shouldn't have to be federally mandated to talk about Black history. So we'll talk about a lot more in the Patreon, but every single week I'll pick one or two people to talk about here on the podcast. And then everybody was throwing me a list, mostly of pop culture people, which is cool. But I think we need to talk about people who have contributed to society in other ways, because there are mathematicians and scientists and, scholars and researchers and adventurers and astronauts. And, there are a lot of different ways that people have contributed to society. And I think we need to celebrate a wide spectrum of that. But today we're talking about Angela Davis and also Benjamin Banneker. Very two interesting people. Oh, there's so much more on this episode. I'm just going to leave you to it. Let's get going. All right. We've got an interesting week ahead. And before I get into the astrology, I just want you to take a deep breath with me. Isn't that better? And then grab your tea, get your matcha, get your iced tea if it's hot where you are. I'm going to have a little hot cocoa, and maybe this week might put something in it. If you're driving to school, folding the laundry, getting the chores done, taking your hot girl or hot guy walk, taking the poochies to the dog park, whatever you're doing today, let's do it together. And understand that regardless of outside circumstances, individually, you can have a great day. You can have a great week. You can have a great month. You can have a great year. All right. That being said, things look very interesting. And I thought before we talk about the astrology of this February week and give you the lowdown and the rundown, I thought I'd talk a little bit about, what did we miss when it came to the election? Because I know when I look at my track record on accuracy, I don't throw my whole chest in unless I'm very, very certain. And much like Alan Lickman, the political analyst, I'm going to say, well, because it was broken. Okay. We use frameworks to interpret information, whether you are analyzing political data. If I'm sure meteorologists do the same thing. They have frameworks. They know, if the barometer is here and the wind speed is there and the clouds are like this, then the most likely outcome is going to be X, Y, or Z. Okay. In fact, I'd say weather people, meteorologists, and astrologers are a lot alike because people get really mad at us when we're wrong and they blame us when we're right. They think it's magic. And I have explained this many times on this podcast, but I know we've grown a lot. A lot of new people are finding us. So I'm not going to be grouchy about having to explain it again. I realize I am new to some of you, and all you have seen is that. Okay. But I'm just going to say it for my patrons. I called the frickin' iceberg. the week it happened, way harder. Now, the one thing I always said, and in fact in 2023, and I put a post up from TikTok onto my Patreon. It's a free post. You can go take a look at it. Where I had said, I don't want to give election predictions because you're going to be mad. Because it's not about who becomes president. It's who's making the laws, who's making the rules at all levels. And while everybody is busy looking out at what's going on in the federal government, especially when you look at what the legacy media is doing or the mainstream media is doing, they're not talking too much about what Musk is doing. Okay. And so, which we are seeing more on social media as people report from the ground, right? It's called a rope-a-dope. In fact, I was listening to Cargill talk about that on the news because my dad was watching the news. The news is back on in this house judiciously. And he was going off about it being a rope-a-dope. They're trying to get, just like when Muhammad Ali would fight, he'd keep people busy, wear them down, and then in the 8th round, he'd do a KO. And that's kind of what's happening. They're trying to exhaust people. It's easy to be exhausted with this, but you don't have that luxury right now because many metaphysicians have been saying, you're on your own. There's nobody coming to save you. We do not have the cavalry coming in. Okay. The cavalry is not coming. Nobody's going to come and pick us up, put us on their horse, and ride away into the sunset. Damn it. We're going to have to take care of ourselves, and we're going to have to do that through community, small, tight groups, people you can trust. Okay. Closely knit groups. All right. If you want to know more specifics about that, I'll talk about it on the Patreon only podcast, but that's about as much as I'm going to say about it here out in the World Wide Web. But anyway, back to astrology predictions. Like any kind of analysis, we're looking at a framework. We're not sitting there rubbing our temples going, I see a vision of the future. We know that planet X can express this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, when we're dealing with subject Y. So when you're looking at something politically, you have a spectrum. Okay. Politically, this was wrong. This was off. It was off for political analysts. It was off for um, people who understand civics. It was off for sociologists. It was off. Okay. When I looked at those charts way back when, I said it's murky, and what I should have said was not party, but authority, the authority that holds the executive retains it, because I think it has to do with the money. I did not see the financial deals or the heist. Okay, the heist or a bloodless coup. I did not see that until 2 weeks before the election because I decided to look at Elon Musk's chart. Because remember, Elon Musk did not get involved until right up close. And that was some of the skullduggery. Okay, that was some of the skullduggery. And when you look out at the media and their portrayal of things, well, a lot of it is absolute obfuscation or diminishment of the facts. So one of the things I wanted to do, even though my audience seems to be very aware, is to talk about media literacy to understand when things are being used to drive outrage and how that is purposely designed to wear us out. Talk about the difference between opinion and fact. We talk about that. And my guest is a patron because I put a call out for patrons. If you have expertise, and it could be anything, it could be like gardening, it could be food prep, it could be media literacy, like Carri joining me today. She's a traditionally trained journalist, and so we talk the difference between opinion and fact, and how headlines are designed to drive you to click on them, things like that. and how to kind of deal and parse out that information and critically assess it. So it's great little conversation, short interview, but very sweet and very impactful. And Carrie's a wonderful lady, and it was such a pleasure to have her on the show. We'll have her back because she wrote a book, and I'm going to get her back on the show, but you'll hear about that later. So again, when it comes to astrological predictions, when I'm looking at something, like if I'm looking at the weather, I'm not seeing politics. I'm looking at the astrology chart for the same day and a different parameter. I'm focused in, I'm looking for the weather. When I'm looking for maybe civil, like how's social the world doing? Like how's society doing? I look for a different set of parameters. I know those planets, they have a spectrum of expression. And just like in the magazine, the Awake Space Astrology magazine that you can find on my Patreon, I always say a storm and political unrest look a lot alike. Okay. So I could be seeing big storms and there's political violence. I could think it's political violence and it could be a big storm. I use conditional language, and my bad. I did not use conditional language with the one prediction, and I'm not going to name names because I really don't want to name names. Okay, you know who I'm talking about. Because there's nothing in that chart that shows that person is in a position of leadership right now. Nothing. Even with Jupiter about to go direct, it will be then challenged by Saturn again. And Saturn is starting to challenge that person's sun. This does not lend to being in a leadership. Like if I had a client, and that's how I look at the chart. Like if I don't like somebody, this is how I step back from my bias. I go, what would I tell a client going for a promotion? Okay. So we're going to see some stuff happen this month. You have to remember Mars is going to go direct on February 23rd. And that's sitting right on that person that will remain nameless as Venus and Saturn. And that could be very interesting to watch happen. I'm not saying they get instant consequences at all. I'm not saying they're going to be drilling in a cup just yet. That does happen probably sometime in 2025, 2026. That was one of the predictions I had long standing. And 8 out of 10 of my predictions for that person have been accurate. So why did we miss the big one? The one that everybody wanted to be right, including me. I don't think we actually had an election. I think it was so interfered with. And I think we'll find that out eventually and way too late. Okay. And I expect to be vindicated along the way because it's just the astrology it doesn't add up to what we are experiencing now. It does add up to business deals. So that's where we're at. So I just thought I'd give you that explanation. And what else is going to be on the podcast this week? Okay, going to go over the headlines, what to expect in those. Okay. Sadly, last week's were correct with the big air accident, more than one. And those are tragic. People asked why I didn't do TikToks about it. I don't like being right about bad things. I don't like being right about tragedies. People saying, well, why aren't you, I had people, can you say more about it? What do you want me to say? I predicted an air accident of significance, a tragic air accident, and that's what happened. I don't know what else I could say about it other than it is horrendous. And I am absolutely heartbroken for the family. What do you want me to do? Sit up and cry? I don't know. I don't know what I would say. I don't tend to make I told you so videos over tragedies. I actually don't like to profit off of that. So there, the weather in Australia is like I said it would be back in 2024 in June when I made my original predictions for 2025. And there's both fires and flooding. I think we could see some flooding coming up in the next 2 weeks here in the United States. So if you live near rivers or near bodies of water, be apprised where I don't have locations for you guys. It's just if you live near bodies of water and it's not super dry, like if you've been getting rain or snow or ice or whatever, keep an eye on it. All right, keep an eye on it. That's all I'm saying. What else have I got for you? Oh, it's Black History Month. Okay, so we don't, just like to wear a mask, you don't need a federal mandate to be courteous and wear a mask when you have a cold or flu or COVID or TB or something else like that. If you've got one of those communicable diseases, then wearing a mask would be a courtesy. Just like that, we don't need the federal government to designate Black History Month for us to celebrate it. And so, all throughout February, I'm going to be taking a look at notable people of American history who happen to be Black. Okay. Today, we're going to look at Angela Davis, an amazing woman who has inspired millions of people with her strength, her intellect, and her moxie. And so we'll talk about Angela Davis. And I'm also going to talk about one of America's very first astrologers, Benjamin Banneker, who was also responsible for completing the designs for Washington, D.C. He was actually recommended by Thomas Jefferson for the job. And Banneker, who was born a free man, actually told off Jefferson on matters of slavery. And I think it's kind of cool. So we'll talk about him a little towards the end. Fascinating fellow. Sorry, I paused because my dog is making a nest on my bed. All right. I don't know about you, but we warmed up here where I live, and now it's snowing again. So it went cold, it warmed up, and now it's cold and snowing. Right. So we've got patron shout outs because remember, patrons support the show. This show is 100% listener supported. All right, it's time for some patron shout outs. Without patrons, there is no podcast. So big shout out to our newest patrons. We've got Annie, Rose, Athena, KJ, Matthew, Tej, Kendra, Rebecca, Brianne, Deb in California, Jean, Jessica, Michelle, Emily, Robbie, Sarah, Janice, Lisa, Ashley, Rachel, Althea, Molly, Pink Widow, Veda, Diane, Bree from SD, Christine, Lisa, oops, sorry, Jillian, Rose. Oh my gosh, it keeps being a butt. My app keeps switching screens. Marge, Kat, Megan, Silver Willow, Misty, Vicky, Nini, Eva, Tara, Amy, Matthew, Becca, Rachel, Hey Yari, Aaron, Deborah Lynn, Stephanie, Tiara, Erica, Slurpee Winger, Talon, Sue, Tanya, Lisa, Denise, Jen M, April, Danelle, Gina, Meredith, McKenna, Carolyn, Griselda, Miss Laura Dubs, Haley, Mama Lisa, Mouse, Brooke, Amanda, Meg, Heather, Tootie, Kim, Christy, Leslie, April, Deb Z, Maria, Gabby, Alexis, Holly, Aaron, Zoe Z, Brianna, DN Cord 611, Mike, Danielle, Madison, Chelsea, Jennifer, Trista, Haley, Twiggy, Patricia, Isabel, Christina, Janet, Connie, Anne, Naomi, Ashton, Amanda, Lauren, Raquel, Catherine, KSCR, Daniel, Chrissy, Valentina, Kiama 3, Kelly, Lindsay, Nene, Lunar, Rihanna, Corin, Natasha, Michelle, Tara, Law and Coffee and Family 24/7, Emma, Amber, Shirley, Carlotta, Kay, Courtney, Sheila, L, Honor, Holly, Gemini, Moon, Maisie, Rashinda, Jacqueline, Felicia, Kimberly, Aaron, and Yaya. We're going to leave it there. and then we'll do another round. You can become a patron by clicking on the link in the show notes. You can become a supporting member at $5 and you get the chat and live streams with me. You never know when I'm going to pop in and do an audio live stream. We now can video live stream in the Patreon. So that's been super fun. I get to do that. And then I've started something new. That's exciting. And I'll talk about it a little bit later on in the Patreon. But every Friday night, you're going to want to tune in because we're going to have some fun with astrology, even though it looks like the world is falling apart. One of the best things we could do is kind of de-stress and let loose a little bit. So every Friday night, we're going to have some fun in the Patreon. You can find out. We have a variety of ways you can support the podcast. You can join for free. You get a heads up right when I publish the podcast, and I do put up free content. I don't make a ton of content as far as like video content anymore. It takes a long time. And remember, I'm the only one doing this. I'm the one creating all the content and I'm editing it. Working on getting some help. We've had some technical snafus in that direction. And so just working on that. So if you want the real 411, get into the Patreon because you get a lot for it. Don't forget to download your goodies too. All right, let's talk about what's up on deck this week so you can be ready and prepared. But I want you to remember on a personal level, you can have an absolutely fantastic week. Okay. Again, I'm going to remind you that it's super important to bring your energy in. Doom scrolling and being informed isn't going to do you any good if you don't have any power to do anything about it. Okay. Mars is still retrograde. All right. It's still retrograde. So it's time to strategize. It's time to plan. It's time to look at what you can do in the future. It's time to kind of gather, circle the wagons. It is not time to pick up a sword and fight. Okay, it's just not. To clarify something about Mars in Cancer retrograde, people always say that Mars in Cancer isn't direct, and I disagree. People are like, it comes at it sideways. That's an oversimplification because we use the symbol of the crab, but did you know that the crab was not the only symbol used for the sign of Cancer? Back in the Assyrian time, the Babylonian time, they used the turtle, the snapping turtle. So it's armored heavily. Okay. It moves at a steady pace and it'll bite your fingers off. It is not less aggressive. Okay. And so it can be very temperamental as a Mars. When we look at like the lower energy, it takes time to build up speed. Once it's moving, then it's really moving. It's also doggedly determined and very tenacious. That means when it bites down, it doesn't let go. The idea that it's a weaker Mars comes from patriarchal thinking. And remember, I'm a progressive evolutionary astrologer. I believe in widening the scope of our interpretations, especially when we're dealing with human beings, because human beings have free will. So if I was in your physical shoes this week, I would be using the energy of tactics and strategy. Okay, I would be sitting down and saying, what can I do? What do I have the ability to take care of? Even if it's making sure I have extra food in the pantry. What can I prepare for? What do I have the means for? And if I need more means, what skills do I have? It's time to take an assessment of what you actually have control over. And then what do you need to get more of? Notice I said, take a list inventory of what you don't have. What do you need to get more of? Okay. And start making a list, and just putting I need more money isn't going to be it. So if you need an extra income, Okay. You might want to look at planning a side gig. You might want to be looking at how you could flip things. Okay. Gary Vaynerchuk, the entrepreneur and strategist and owner of VaynerMedia, he's also an investor. He, much like Sam, my co-host on Miles to Success, which will be coming out soon. I just need to finish the edits on our first episode. Um, Guess what? Vaynerchuk's family came from Ukraine when he was a little boy. Sam, my co-host, came to the United States as a refugee as well, became an American citizen, but as a young man, found flea markets, learning how to flip things, doing eBay. You may have 500 bucks worth of stuff sitting around your home that you don't use. Is that going to solve all your problems? No, but it's going to teach you something. Okay. So there's always a way when you put your will to it. That is Mars and Cancer energy. Where is the way forward? What can I prepare for? How do I stock my pantry? How do I look at keeping myself secure? Because Cancer energy does not like to feel insecure about things. They get very cranky. So this is the time to stop looking at what makes you helpless, okay, and look at what you can do something about. That's something very, very important for you to do. All right. Looking out at what's happening this week. So we have Jupiter stationing direct. Jupiter is the planet of magnification. Okay. I know people like to say it's luck, but it's really not luck. It's magnification. Okay. With it going direct in Gemini, we should see a magnification of communications. Could be communication issues, problems. So we could see more hacking. We could see interference in communication systems, and they could be big. Let me grab those headlines. I'm going to be editing this episode because guess who closed all their windows out? I did. So, if you're a patron and you get the magazine, I put out the horoscopes and predictions unedited, as I always do before the magazine comes out. The magazine will come out this week. I just have to finish the articles. So here's what I've got for February with the moon in Aries. It's in Aries from the 1st through the 4th. I know that seems like a really long time, but it went in late on the 1st and it's leaving very, very early on the 4th, depending on where you live in the world. So it's kind of a big spread. All right. Historic events, which include natural disasters, fires, mass casualties, and acts of war. Big booms, bombings, car explosions, gas explosions, fires, storms that cause electrical problems or fires. Storms that cause electrical problems or fires, forest fires expand due to wind. Now, California is getting a lot of rain this week, so that shouldn't be California getting fires, but we could see arsons being set. No, you don't need to panic. It doesn't mean it's in your area, nor am I saying it's only in California. This is global. It's global, not just the United States even. We could see issues with North Korea testing missiles or doing something with the border with South Korea. We could see issues with Iran. We could see leadership and or actions taken with drones or missiles. It could be an attack on Iran, or Iran could attack something in the Gulf Cooperation Council states, in the Arabian Gulf or Persian Gulf. Volcanic eruption or firestorms or issues with lava flow or lahars. This is global. Issues with militaries, rogue units, and or mercenaries. Increase in geothermal activity. Military budgets under scrutiny. Multiple countries. War expands in regions with conflicts. Keep an eye on the Middle East, Europe, Eastern Europe. Actually, but parts of Western Europe if they're close in. Keep your eye on China, Taiwan, North South Korea, and a potential escalation at the U.S.-Mexico border. We could see attempted coups, insurrections, and political violence. We could see public violence in a city center, mall, or other public venue, and this could be a shooting or a stabbing. And it could also be something to do with schools. So unfortunately, hopefully that is not something that happens. Poland could be dealing with border security and potential sabotage or terrorist attacks. And that could, Ukraine was going to see an escalation as well. Issues with military. Oh, I have it twice. Military's rogue units and mercenaries. And that could also be paramilitary activity. International organizations under strain or face crisis. This could be something like the United Nations, NATO, WHO, World Bank, World Trade Organization, things like that. And any of them, just because I didn't say, so international organizations in general. Leaders of all forms face opposition, potential assassinations, or deposing of leaders. Again, this is global. CEO or world leader faces health crisis. This could be anything from arterial issues, strokes, or head injuries. So don't get your hopes up. From the 4th through the 6th, the moon is in Taurus and issues of security are up on deck. We could see earthquakes above a 6.0 possible, especially more towards the 6th. Increased potential of seismic activity, any seismic zone. I've got my eye on Chile, Japan, Pacific Northwest offshore, Turkey, Syria, and Central Asia. So anywhere that has an active zone. Explosions, both accidental and man-made. Arsons of government buildings or manufacturing plants. Stock markets, BRICS makes move to destabilize US dollar or economy, or the stock market is extremely volatile. Crypto markets could be volatile and could tank, but they could also perk up. We're talking, those are some Uranus transits with the moon, so these can go either way. It's very hard to call which direction things are going. Recall on food products, potentially. Maybe some news organization will put it out, but we could see issues with food products. We could see issues with cars, trucks, and like farm equipment. Explosion at a manufacturing or food processing plant or plants. Issues with munitions deposits, plants, or stolen weapons and equipment. Massive accident involving semi-truck or semi-trucks or rail. Talk of sanctions against major world powers. Tech sector challenged, union activity, calls for strikes, contract disputes, and layoffs are possible. And these are things we're going to see in the headlines. Doesn't mean it's happening to everybody all at once. We could see President Trump's health in question, or he could go off the rails in some way. There's some volatility there. Cybersecurity breaches, data breaches, DNS server attacks, malware, and ransomware. We could see political infighting and rebellion of all kinds. We could see issues with livestock, food production, processing, and issues with farms and ranches. We see a huge accident, explosion, or fire. It could be more than one incident. This is also global. Big political upset, and this is global. And it's just going to be very shocking, and it'll be like with a leader or a political party. Some big event is going to happen. Don't get your hopes up. It may not be news we want to see, but it's just a big upset. Big erosion events, landslides, mudslides, sinkholes, levee breaches, dike failures, and dam breaches are possible. We could see huge weather issues, lightning, hail, hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, and or torrential rain and flooding. And okay, I know it's not hurricane season, but big wind, big water, that kind of thing. Financial institutions, big banks, private equity firms, and or credit card companies are under pressure. Retail giant under pressure or strain. Maritime accident or issues with naval bases. We could see authority figures or leaders challenged, scandals revealed, and lies exposed. And that is up through the 6th. And then the 6th through the 8th, which is Saturday. And I've got stuff to talk about that because Matilda and I have another event coming up. We've got big wind, fluctuating currents, temperatures swing wildly, could be hurricanes, microbursts, tornadoes, sandstorms, unseasonable wind, multiple storms active in one region. Issues with air travel delays, air traffic control, and accidents of small aircraft and helicopters could be military. It can also have to do with air travel itself, but as far as like maybe TSA has issues, it could be airlines have issues, it could be weather events that delay travel, but there could be a big accident as well. Poisoning, or air quality, water quality, it could be in the news or discussed. Massive car accident, pileup, issues on freeway or high-speed rail, issues with gas, chemicals, or radiation. And that could be solar radiation, but it could also be like a nuclear plant. Let's see, we've got rockets, satellites, the International Space Station, and astronauts. All of that could be up in the news. Data breaches and communication disruption. And that would be including pilfering data out of government offices. Meteorites, northern lights, or space debris falls to Earth. Missiles, drones, and sneak attacks. Major author, speaker, or thought leader speaks out or has scandal. New music released or pop culture icon shows up or performer exposed. So it's positive or negative. There's something up with music performers. Could be an actor as well. International agreements or negotiations fail. Issues with NATO, European Union. Journalist or journalism in the news, violence towards journalists, secrets leaked or revealed from corporations or government agencies, documents discovered that cause scandal or shed light on an unsolved mystery, major manufacturer issues recall or has investigation into faulty parts, explosion in air, satellite fails or falls to Earth, meteorites or shooting stars or some strange happening in the sky, and or lights in the sky could include space station astronauts having issues. Legal matters, justices, and federal high courts. This is global. Okay. And then we end the week on the 9th. And so February 8th through the 10th is the moon in Cancer. Okay. So remember, the moon changes signs every 2.5 days. So we have a big precipitation event, including rain, snow, ice, damage to buildings and or neighborhoods, arsons and fires in domestic dwellings, monarchs under strain or monarchies under strain. And that could be oligarchies as well at this point. Public uprisings, global. Accidents on major roads, freeways, or bridges. Issues with foodborne illnesses, especially listeria and salmonella. Issues with dairy or dairy farms, dairy products, recalled poultry and eggs as well. Leaders and politicians under pressure and strain. CEO or world leader has health issue or steps down due to ill health or is deposed. Again, this could be global. All right. There's a lot of stuff happening all over the world. Big rain, issues with rivers, floodplains, hurricanes, hail, big tides. Again, when I say hurricane, I don't mean like specifically a hurricane, but like that kind of big weather event. Could be like a atmospheric river as well. High profile domestic violence case. Fires fueled by wind expand exponentially. Australia, I'm looking at you. Be safe. Economic crisis or currency values influx. Inflation, trade imbalances. I wrote that before the tariffs. Major infrastructure destroyed or big failure of dam, bridges, or shopping center. Potential seismic activity, mostly offshore, but ranging from 5.8 to 7.0. We're looking at Japan, Eastern Russia, Alaska, Pacific Northwest, or in the Pacific Ocean. Potential tsunami. If it's in the Pacific Northwest, it's offshore. Okay. High profile case involving violence committed by a woman or a person presenting as female. Water equality issues, environmental issues, and climate change. Water wars begin. No, you guys often wonder what I mean by water war. A water war, I'm kind of referring to like when the farmers and ranchers warred over water in the 1800s, but fighting over water rights, who's in control of it. Female presenting person of note in the news speaks out against current policies. This could be global. Restaurants close, issues with food supply and food processing plants, sewers and septic systems are in the news, water system failures or contamination. That's a biggie. And then we have another, I wrote erosion causing storm, hurricane, waterspout, big waves, tsunamis. So big water, I obviously emphasize that. That's really big right now. Banking and currencies under strain, global. And in fact, the Bank of England just popped into my head. So there we go. Attacks in public spaces, mass casualty event, or school shooting or stabbing. So those are all up on deck this week. That doesn't mean it's happening to you. It means it is what's possible. Doesn't mean it's 100%. I'm 80% certain that most of that will be in the headlines at some point. It's fairly broad spectrum, but specific enough you can kind of point it out in the headlines. We had quite a few come in. People are always like, oh my God, you were right, ever since the one wasn't right. Again, I'm still 87% accurate. You're not going to get it all right. Obviously, we'd like those big ones to come in. Just wouldn't we? For all of our sake. I can say with absolute certainty, if I could have seen what's going on now, I would have been screaming to the rooftops and trying to get you to understand how important it was for you to fight. I was telling everybody to be involved at the local level and shore up your states. I'm going to tell you, if you want to put your energy anywhere, put it in resisting in the state itself, because there's a lot of shenanigans happening in the states themselves, especially where there are a lot of unreasonable people. Okay. And you know what I mean by that. So that's what we've got coming up. Let me pull the astrology for the week. I tell you, those working on this way back in May and June of last year for this year, before we had any of the context. Now it all starts to make sense, and I'm like, oh man. All right. So Venus was conjunct Neptune on the 1st, and Venus moves into Aries on the 3rd. So today, Monday, we have Mercury trine Jupiter today. And so I think we're going to see a lot of communications foibles while Jupiter stations. Jupiter will be direct on the 4th. That's the day the tariffs take place. That's going to be interesting to watch. That is just going to be interesting to watch. So as I think that's going to blow shit up. Not necessarily us up, but it's going to be interesting. We could also see stabbings on the 4th with Jupiter and Gemini. Venus is sextile Pluto on the 7th. This is going to feel pretty dang good for Aries placements. So Aries placements, when Venus moves in, and I'm talking about Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, rising. If you've got early degrees, like 0 to 5 degrees, you may feel really energized, and you might actually, be looking good, might be feeling cute, might delete later. So that could be some good energy. Again, just because shit's flying out in the rest of the world doesn't mean you can't have a wonderful day. February 9th, we have the Sun conjunct Mercury and Mars is trine Saturn. This is going to be a very, very interesting Sunday. There might be some stuff on Sunday. It could be kind of, I think we could see some shenanigans happen. I think there could be some public unrest on those days. So keep your eyes open on that. It's a very wet month. It's a very wet month. I think we're going to see a lot of precipitation, whether it comes in as rain, snow, hail, whatever. It's just going to be a little bit wild. I want you guys to be very, very aware that your intuition could be very heightened. You could be a lot more receptive. You could have very active dreams. You might even, get flashes of insight. All human beings are psychic. If you're a patron, you get my guide to instinct and intuition, and it kind of goes through how to identify your clairs in your birth chart. And you get that for free. Just if you're a patron at the $5 level and up, go to the shop and you can just download that. It's already set for you to be able to get that for free without a code. You just download it. But all human beings have intuitional abilities. These are very heightened right now. If you already know you're psychic, if you already know you're intuitive, then you probably have been extra sensitive. Okay. The collective is whipped up and it is impossible to ignore. And so it's very important for you to work on some protections. And we can protect ourselves energetically first by starting with our mind and critically assessing what's going on. All good practitioners, ones that last, hone their mind. Okay. When I say train your Mercury, and I've been talking about that for years, right? You guys, if you guys have been with me, my OGs, drop a comment in Spotify if you know I've been talking about training your Mercury. And what does that mean? That means stopping before you go down the spiral. That's, energy and thoughts are the same thing. Thoughts are energy and energy is magic. So one of your first protections is guarding your mind, guarding your thoughts. This week on the Patron Only podcast, I'm going to talk about egregores and thought forms. Okay. And more protective use of your energy. Okay. Astrologers who are traditionally trained are also trained in energy work. Okay. There's no point in understanding all of this if you don't know how to use it. Okay. So that's up on deck coming up this week. So the first thing you can do, because we've got a lot of big mental energy happening, there's going to be a lot done to cause chaos and sow discontent, to confound, confuse, obfuscate, and work you up and cause outrage. So you aren't guarding your mind. So practice now. Listen to the podcast as much as you want. All right, let's do some patron shout outs. And then we will let's talk about some media literacy after the patron shout out with Carri Karhoun. What a fortunate woman am I to have so many people support my work in the world. I am honored every single day. And that's why I put my heart and soul into the Patreon. You guys noticed I shifted my energy because I spent a lot of years screaming into the wind, trying to warn people that massive systemic change was coming. I couldn't really describe it. I couldn't really tell you what it is because, like I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast, we don't always know exactly what's going to happen. We can see the markers in the charts and we say that's really big change. It's going to be very volatile. It might involve food. It might involve electricity. It might involve, whatever, communications disruptions. But we can tell you, it doesn't give us a full, story. And, well, now we get to see what it is. I've been looking at this time period since I was, 26, 27 years old. And, oh, wow, it's kind of crazy. So to have so many people support my work in the world, I am honored and I want to thank you. Alrighty. What we got here? We've got Senny Wenny, Penny, Natalie, Stephanie, Ivy, Whiskey, Rosalind, Joanna, Taylor, Margaret, Nicole, Origami Moon, Tennille, Danielle, Nikki, Mari, Jessica, Chelsea, Claudia, Nina, Alexandra, Melia, Debbie D, but not as in Downer, Whole Boy Jim, Cass, Lauren, Karen, Natalie, Elizabeth, Estelle, Audrey, Sammy, Jen, Kristen, Jennifer, Liz BT, Jacqueline, Beeks, Myra, Nicole, Michelle, Suzanne, Brianna, Kate, Miranda, Kayla, Jay, Maggie, Peacock and Paisley, Natalie, T. Smith, Desiree, E. Ortiz, Sarah, Sage, Laura, Claudia, H. Beck, Gustavo A.M., Melanie, Valkyrie, Destiny, Grace, Melinda, Jen, Jennykins, Nicole, Chelsea, Rashanta, Noli, Angela, M.M., Rochelle, DB, Shelley, and Lisa. thank you all for being patrons. I really appreciate that. So let's talk about media literacy. And it's my great pleasure to have Carri Karhoun on the show with me. She's a trained journalist. She's also just completed her book, Up in Flames, which is a story, her personal journey of being a wildfire victim and having overcome great adversity to living life more content, more holistic, and certainly understanding the power of resiliency, which includes the ability to adapt and pivot. But today we're talking about media literacy and what you need to know about why you have to think critically when you're looking at the headlines, when you're consuming any kind of media. And I think we'll start off with little George Carlin. He had something to say about this, and this is from the 80s. Just a little blurb from George, and then we go into the interview.
Things that make us different. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they, the rich, can run off with all the fucking money. Fairly simple thing. Happens to work. Anything that's different about us, you know that's what they're pushing at you. Racial differences, religious, ethnic, national backgrounds, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything they can do to keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank. Politicians and the media always pushing the things that separate us, things that make us different. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They divide the rest of the people.
All right, everybody, I'm super excited. Today I have Carri Karhoun with me, who is a media specialist and formerly trained journalist. Hi, Carri.
Hi, nice to be here. I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about the media. It's one of my favorite topics and one that's really misunderstood on many levels. So I love talking about it.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. What's misunderstood about it? Like what riles you up?
A lot riles me up. I just want to start out real quick, like full disclosure. I was a traditionally trained journalist. And what that means is I was trained to report the facts objectively and present them. And it was newspapers where I was at. Report those facts objectively and then get all the different viewpoints and express those viewpoints and those opinions and not my own opinions. It was trying to report the news, reporting the news objectively.
Right.
And so what we have seen in recent years, largely since the advent of the internet, is the media devolving into a bunch of talking heads on TV, telling us what to think and how we should feel about things, rather than us, the public, looking at the facts and seeing the facts and making our own opinions. And so that really gets me riled up when I see these talking heads telling us what to think and how to feel and it's super biased. And that's what really gets me riled up.
Yeah. That's why there was a whole band called the Spin Doctors, right?
That's right.
Because that's what they're doing. They're spinning information. So when people say they want to be aware, okay, because we've been sold this, you have to be aware.
Yes.
How does media play a role in that? Is reading a bunch of articles or going through Blue Sky? Because I don't know, many of my listeners are still on the app formerly known as Twitter. What's a good way to stay aware?
So that's a really good question. So I'm actually on TikTok. I'm kind of low profile, and I made a couple of videos about the media. And I got this question, what are some good news sources to go to for objective reporting rather than this biased stuff that we get? And I mean, I would encourage you, because I gave a dissertation to show people where to go for that. And my TikTok is called Isbot and Zoe. Those are my dogs' names. IZBOT and Zoe. So I explain where to find that information. And basically, in short, it's the Harvard Library puts out a report every year. And it's called, let me look at it. I forgot the name of it. It's called the media bias chart.
Okay.
And and it walks you through how to find the publications that are in the center and are most truthful or objective, if you will. And on the sliding scale, publications that go hang to the left and then
Mm-hmm.
hang to the right. And so I would encourage folks to do that. And it's a company called Adfontis, ADFONTIS
Okay.
.com, that puts out this media bias chart.
Okay. We'll get that in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's great. So, understanding media bias. So,
Yeah.
obviously, traditionally, we would look at right, so called, and left, so called. I don't really see them too polarized anymore, at least in the United States.
Okay.
Political analyst, even our leftists are fairly right compared to other places in the world.
Yeah.
But I mean, in my understanding, like yellow journalism started with William Randolph Hearst, right?
Right.
You know, give me a picture and I'll start you a war, right? Um, how can people, even with those tools, read headlines or read, and I know you can't tell people what to think, but what can
Yeah.
they do critically as they approach a news story to kind of protect themselves from what we're seeing, like in the shock and awe that's going on?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, and I hope this answers your question. And it
Hmm.
goes back to, the media, all these publications. The media is a business, just like any other business out there. And so their aim is to make a profit. And they make a profit by you, the reader or the viewer, going to their website. And so they're seeking to pull you in. And their headlines are going to be driven that way to pull you in, to make you afraid, make you scared, like, oh my God, what's going on? What am I missing? Click, I got to read
Hmm.
this. And so it's become very sensationalistic, in my opinion, about just trying to pull that audience in because that's how they make their profit. And and when you see a headline, a grabbing headline, it's I've seen sometimes even the headline is misleading about what the entire story is about.
Yeah, that's
And
become very, very common. I've
it's
noticed
very
that.
common.
Yeah.
And on a side note, a lot of headlines aren't even written by the author of the article. They're written
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
editors.
Hmm.
And a lot of folks don't understand that. They think that it's written by the author, but no, it's a specialized headline writer designed
Hmm.
to pull you in.
Hmm.
So I think that when we approach the news, when we approach these headlines, I would just say know that what you're getting into is that they're aimed at drawing you in as the audience, that shock and awe to get you to open up that article, whether it's like the New York Times, I'm just using that as an example,
Right.
or whatever the new CNN, Fox News, whatever it might be, they're
Right.
aimed to draw you in.
Independent, Guardian, I'll list them off, whatever you're looking at, Al Jazeera, or moving over to,
Exactly.
WAPO, whatever.
And
So,
what I
yeah.
found too with Fox News, of course, and even CNN has gone
Mm-hmm.
this way. The headlines are aimed at creating rage and
Mm-hmm.
outrage, and
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, what are they saying? Click, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
drawing you in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things I've learned to do when looking at those, because they get me too sometimes,
Mhm.
they're good at it.
Yes, they are.
I decide to read the whole article, or at
Yes,
least,
yes,
be
absolutely.
like, okay, is this as bad as I think it is? Is this really happening? Is this, and asking those questions. Um, when you look at and the headlines are to draw people in 100%, and
Yes,
on the
absolutely.
internet, that it is a skill because you're in an attention economy. But how do you know when it's a more factual article versus an opinion? Like, let's just take it all the way down.
So that's a really good question. And some news organizations are getting better at listing by the article analysis, which that tells you that that is not an objective article. It is someone's
Mm-hmm.
opinion. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's that. They've gotten a little bit better in labeling what their article's about, but it really comes down to the viewer or the reader that when as you're reading the article or watching the segment, is this somebody's opinion or is it fact? Are they saying, you know, Joe Engineer reported today that this happened versus it's my opinion, and you just
Mm-hmm.
have to really listen
Mm-hmm.
and use your own power and your own just that your own power, your own objectivity,
Or
taking a step back.
yeah, so people using describing words like these
Yeah,
evil people or incompetent fools or things like
the
that would be an
liberals or
opinion. Yeah,
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 the
liberals or the
liberals or the
conservatives or yeah. Mm,
yes, because those are in today's vernacular. Those are now charged words.
right. Okay. So if you had like one thing you really want to get off your chest when it comes to talking about media, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say it's really up to us as the reader and the viewer to take a step back and look at the news that we are consuming. That a lot of it is, are these talking heads who are telling us what to think and what to believe versus us looking at the information and the facts and making our own determination for ourselves. And that is the big message I'd like to get across is it really comes down to what we as the consumers are doing in consuming our news
Mhm.
and how we're looking at it. And if you're on a Fox News or a CNN or something that really skews right or left, take that into consideration and try to find something that comes more towards the middle. And those tend to be Associated Press, NPR, they tend to fall more
Mhm.
in the middle and in the more
Mhm.
objective, truthful reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. What about Reuters? How do you feel about Reuters?
I feel good about Reuters. I think it's
Yeah.
up there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, although a lot of them are going behind paywalls, and I think I figured it out because Reuters wasn't behind a paywall for a really, really long time.
Okay.
I don't think it was ad revenue going down.
Hmm.
I think it's to protect their speech.
I would agree with you on that. I would agree with you because there's right now in today's world, there's so much like venom and a reporter reports on something and the right or the left comes and attacks them for it and
Hmm.
and readers and viewers are going away. They're going to the Fox Newses or the CNNs. They're going to
Hmm.
these to the left or the right. And yeah, I would agree with you that it is to protect their freedom of speech.
Hmm. It happened right before November, and I
Hmm,
took that as a sign because I do things much the same way. My stronger opinions go behind a paywall
that's
um,
interesting.
for both safety's sake and because I'm more protected as a business than I am as a person. So, in this country,
Yes,
um, legally.
I also
So,
noticed. I think it was the Guardian did the same thing.
mm,
In the
hmm,
Guardian, I would put them as a trusted news source.
yeah, I like the Guardian.
Hmm.
Independent, I also do, but that's because I read it in college. So it's an emotional attachment, not necessarily a viewpoint. Um, do people really need to read all the headlines to be informed?
No, not at all. And in fact, even I, who still loves the traditional media, I have had to scale back with all the rhetoric, with all the propaganda that's going on, it's overwhelming. And I've even had to take a step back and go, okay, I've read that article. I know what they're going to say. I don't need to read that again. I know that this is going to be biased. I don't want to hear it. I'm protecting my own space. I'm protecting my own power, because I get upset actually when I see just the propaganda, because it's so infuriating to me, and that people are just buying into it, and
Right.
just like, yeah, that's I agree, and that's the truth. Well, no, it's not. It's opinion. It's trying to make you think and feel a certain way,
Right.
and
Right.
and so yeah, even I've had to just scroll past, just go doop doop. Yep, I see it, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, Propaganda.
Yeah.
And the media has actually always played a role in propaganda, because
Yes, it has.
sometimes the facts that are reported to the media are propaganda,
Yes.
that being portrayed as fact. Um, my first undergrad class in international relations, the professor stood up and said, "Before I say anything else, get out your pens and pencils and write this down. The news is not a source of policy."
Right.
And we all were like, how can that be so? And so, not to vilify the news, but it
Mhm.
is tends to be owned. Papers tend to be owned by wealthy people or
Yep.
organizations. Always have been. Poor people couldn't get a printing press, um, and everyone has their agenda.
Yep.
And so there's editorial policies from, some places are better than others. So when it comes to propaganda, how are some of the ways people can recognize that? How can they learn to read between the lines, or at least recognize it and say, I don't know. I think I'll read something else today.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It again goes back to the slant. Who is telling you this? Where is the news coming from? And and looking for those charged words. Liberals said this, or
Mm-hmm.
conservatives said that, and it's designed to evoke emotion and fear and anger and rage to get you to act and feel in a certain way. So propaganda. I'm biased. Fox News is the biggest propaganda machine out there, in my opinion, or one of them, and and others have followed suit. But it's just really designed to evoke emotion,
Mm-hmm.
one way
Mm-hmm.
or the other.
Yeah, it's done a lot of damage for sure.
Mhm.
The other ones have gone that way.
Yes, they have.
And they're not, even with rare exceptions, even like I said, left, because like CNN just got bought out by a right wing billionaire,
Yeah,
so there goes that editorial policy.
exactly.
But
Yep.
and not everybody's going to be aware of that. But when it comes to trying to get people to feel like outrage, so like right now, what we see in the hostile takeover that has been, and I will
Mhm.
say it as that because I've reviewed the astrology a million times, and I'm like, because it was a hostile takeover. Um, that's all I can see. I saw a heist in business deals 2 weeks before, and went, oh shit. Um, so with that, the current administration is utilizing a lot of very deliberate, very very shocking things. These are being reported on somewhat objectively in some cases,
Mhm.
some to drive outrage. Why should we be concerned about that outrage? And that could be your opinion.
Yeah, it's what I feel, and I think what we're all seeing is it clearly how our nation is divided, and and the concern I have is it seems to be pitting Americans against Americans, and and that is very dangerous as far as I'm concerned. And we're all Americans, and
Hmm.
and the concern is why are why is there this division, it seems? Why is there this drive to create a division between us?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's,
As George Carlin said, there's a club and we ain't in it.
yeah,
And so we're the club and they ain't in it. That's when we look at the top down. And I feel the same way. It's hard to watch things get divided deliberately.
yeah,
There's a deliberateness to it. One of the things that concerns me with the utilization of outrage, either through just acts that are done or messaging and propagandizing, is the kind of the damage it does to the individual as well. Just getting the adrenaline pumping and getting because you're not thinking for yourself at that point,
right.
and that leads people to be easily manipulated. Um, when you were studying journalism, did you guys? I'm assuming you studied propaganda at least in one class.
It's been a while, but I'm sure we
Not
did.
to well to do it to yeah to well I was gonna say yeah to do it well I have a Cancer Mercury, so like I can remember when I was like 2, so I forget not everybody has a Cancer Mercury,
Right.
but I was a journalist then. How do you disseminate propaganda into a news article judiciously?
I think it goes back to taking a step back and what is fact based and what is opinion based,
Hmm.
and and presenting the facts without allowing your own bias into the presentation of those facts.
Hmm. So, can we do a list of factual statements? Maybe, I mean, we can be facetious, we can be funny, we can
Okay.
be. Um, so, if we'll play a game. You
Okay.
call it whether it's a fact or an opinion.
All right.
Okay. Uh, did you hear that AOC said that Joe Manchin has big, smelly feet?
I would take that information and go, no, I did not hear that. And I would not report it out necessarily because I can't confirm that AOC said that fact about having big smelly feet. So I would go back and look at the article or the video and see if AOC said that guy had big smelly feet. And then the fact based reporting on that would be AOC said, I forgot who you mentioned, but AOC said this guy has big smelly feet. And when I and then when asked this guy if he has big smelly feet, he said, "Oh, I forgot to change my socks that day." You know, so so so
I know it's silly, but sometimes that's what the news feels like to me some days.
it does.
Yeah. So another one.
Okay,
Um, on January 10th, 2025, the international organization in charge of trade and commerce declared the apple crop to be under yield by 20%.
that's fact.
There you go. Why?
Yeah,
Why would
because
that be a
it's
fact?
reporting. There's no bias in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's this organization declared that this crop was reduced by this X amount of percent. It would be different if it was like the liberals or conservatives made that crop go down like that. That is
You mean
there's
you
no
mean like you mean like turning on the water in California?
yeah, kind of, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's it's fact versus opinion. I keep
Right.
going back to that, and I know sometimes
Right.
it's hard to differentiate the two, but you just have to.
Well,
You're
there's been an effort to obfuscate what a fact is in the
yes,
last 20 years
yes, there has been.
almost, with
Yeah,
alternative facts. So,
yes, alternative. Yes,
so numbers, dates, quotations,
yes.
you know, and even
attributions
attributions. Yeah.
according
It,
to the Guinness Book of World Records,
mm-hmm.
the man with the largest head, I don't know,
Right.
is this man.
Right.
So
Because you can go look it up.
you can go look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on TikTok, we brought up TikTok. Let's talk
Mhm.
about TikTok.
Okay.
There is something that drives me nuts on TikTok, and I'm a contrarian. So I'm kind of like an anti trend person. It kills me to do trends because I'm like, I don't want to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, People will jump on a news story and give their hot take, their opinion, or try to report upon a report.
Yeah.
And people will trust influencers because we have this very close up view. Like TikTok
Yeah.
is very well designed in its layout because you're very eye to eye with people. And I notice I do it too. You feel like you know them. You feel like you're on FaceTime with them, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not recessed. And so people will jump on this. When a news story breaks, we'll get 20 links to the same news story. And I'm like, guys, read first.
Yeah.
Um, but what are your thoughts on that? Like what how can we approach that? There may be no answer to this, but
I don't
what are
know
your
if there's an answer.
thoughts?
One of my concerns in watching some of those videos that you just mentioned is like you have someone saying, I just so and so just reported this. And I'm like, well, my ears prick up because then I'm like, are you reporting that correctly? Are you
Mm,
reporting it's I was just gonna say it's kind of like the game. Remember when you're a kid telephone
mhm,
and you're like
mhm.
you give the message to the next person who shares it to the next person, shares it to the next person, and then by the time it gets full circle, the message is completely convoluted. It has
Yeah,
nothing to do with the original
yeah,
message.
yeah.
And so when I see that, my ears prick up and go, is that really did that really happen? And
Mhm.
are you just summarizing what you heard and inserting your own bias and opinion? And I know that you and Matilda get that often. That you guys will say
All the
something
all the time.
all the time, and then people are like, Laurie said this, Matilda said that. They're like, you guys are like, I did not say that, because people are hearing and
What they
interpreting
want to hear.
what they want to hear, and so you need you in the collective sense need
Right.
to be very careful about that. Are you are you getting sucked into a game of telephone?
Mhm.
That's why don't we go to the original source and see what they really did say? And am I just hearing it from someone along the telephone line who interpreted it differently and the message is now getting garbled?
Yeah. I will tell listeners this is what I do, even with Matilda, because remember, we talk all the time. We have
Hmm.
each other's numbers. So I let, because people try to tell us our predictions. We're like, we know,
Yeah.
but we know. But anyway, Matilda, when I wasn't looking at TikTok for a little bit, I took a break, and mostly because I was very, very busy producing the podcast and the magazine, and I do a lot of other things. She'd say, "Oh, I just saw this TikTok about this politician in America." Remember, she's Australian.
Yeah.
And I'd say, "Oh, what was her name again?" I would go to Google and I would do a search.
Yep.
I trust her. I don't trust the information on anything.
Hmm.
I'm always verifying
And
because I
and I
don't
would say
trust
that that
any of
is
it.
critical for people, the collective public in general, to verify.
Mhm.
Trust, but verify.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. I'll be like, "Hang on, Googling." She doesn't get offended by it.
Yeah.
She'll do the same thing if I'm like, "Hey, I heard there's something going on in Australia." And she goes, "Oh, I don't know as much about Australia as she does.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to be able to necessarily tell the difference, right?
Right.
Between, unless they use describing words, but I don't know if it's true something's on fire somewhere. I don't know. And I'll be like, and she'll check it. She'll go, oh, that's really far away. Or that's,
Right.
actually the floods you predicted are happening right now, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so it's good. Friends should verify
Yep.
friends just to
And
keep
there's
each
nothing
other.
wrong with verifying. It doesn't mean you don't trust the person. You're just verifying.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. My daughter does it to me all the time. She's like, let me look it up. And I'm like, go for it. Use your noodle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
Back to being informed and aware. I get asked a lot. And in my opinion, knowledge isn't power unless you know how to use it,
Right.
and neither is being informed. Um, what are some things you do? Because I know you can't necessarily advise everybody what they could do, but what do you do when you feel a little bit overwhelmed with all the information? What do you do to move away from that space?
I take a step back and I disengage for a little while.
Hmm.
Very much. Especially recently, even with TikTok, it's become really toxic, and it's easy
Hmm.
to get drawn into some creators' messaging and become overwhelmed by it, and
Hmm.
then sometimes even this fear and rage starts to build. I'm like, whoa, and then I don't want that to sap my energy
Hmm.
and what I and that get just become overwhelmed in my head of like feelings of like doom or just because maybe it isn't
Hmm.
doom and it probably isn't
Hmm.
doom, but
Yeah.
you're just bombarded with this messaging, and so I take a step back and disengage.
Hmm. What are some of your favorite things to do to keep yourself busy and away from it while you're disengaged?
I'm a writer. I
Hmm.
just finished my first book. It's not out yet. It's called
Congratulations.
Up in Flames. It's with the editor. So I've spent a lot of time working on my book to get that
Hmm.
into its best place. Um, and I ride horses in the
Nice.
desert, and
Hmm.
that's I enjoy that immensely.
I love that.
Yeah.
Those are good things to do.
Mhm.
Writing or writing.
Yes.
Um, I,
Writing and writing.
right? Two things that go great together. I, I take walks. I
Yep.
can
That's
feel it if I
very
don't.
good.
Yeah, you gotta move the body, clear the mind, clear the schmutz. I clean sometimes. Probably not as often as I should.
And I organize as well, and I take my dog Oscar for
Hmm.
walks. And
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm. And it makes you more effective.
it does. And it's
Hmm.
actually empowering. It gets you back to being grounded again,
Hmm.
and just stepping away from the noise. And because it's
Hmm.
easy to get pulled into the noise,
Hmm.
and just taking a step back.
I love that. I love that. Those are all really great suggestions. Um, is there anything burning inside of you that we didn't cover today?
I don't think so. Again, my main message is just really, and I keep using the same word for
Hmm.
people to take a step back from when they're watching the news or reading the news, and take a step back and look at what news am I reading? Who is the
Hmm.
author or the speaker?
Hmm.
And are they telling me what to think and how to feel? Or or are they presenting the facts so that I can decide for myself how I feel about that? That's a
Hmm.
big message.
Those are really important questions.
Yeah.
I may put those in a post.
Do
But
it.
yeah. Yeah. So and I get it, people need to drive traffic if they have a business. 100%. Me too.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I try really hard not to completely scare people. I've done one that I did on purpose to scare people and it worked. But I was making a point. They called me a fear monger. I'm like, no, now you can be scared. But that's only because I'm a Scorpio rising. I'm like, do you know
Yeah.
how hard I try not to scare you? Um, but
Yeah.
even when I explain, like, my predictions are, it's in the range of possibility. It's what I'm narrowing down into what I believe is or think is the most likely outcome, which means it's not a fact. It can happen.
Right.
So, conditional language, is that something people should look for and look at and understand, like possible, probable, could?
Absolutely. That's a really, really good point. I'm really glad you brought that up. Um, Anytime you hear a news person, a speaker, or even in the written form, if they're like, "This could happen," and "this may happen," well, it hasn't. This is
Right.
just it's speculation, and so
Mhm.
and that too is designed to kind of pull us in and make us and
Mhm.
can make us feel afraid because like, oh my God, what if
Mhm.
that does happen? Well, it hasn't. This is just
Right.
someone speculating, you know.
Well, or an educated guess. I'm going to say as an
Yes.
analyst, because
Hmm.
sometimes it's analysis. Like if I read a financial document by, financial analysis, it said it could raise by this much. Here's the
Hmm.
parameters, because you can't prove it
Right.
until it happens, right? So it hasn't happened. You're right. Um, but sometimes it's done on purpose to scare people. I agree. Not by me. But
No, and I'm
I
not
put the
applying, and I'm not
condition.
applying that
Yeah.
either.
Yeah,
It's more,
but could is like, hey, keep your eyes out. It might happen. It could rain today. Have a
it,
jacket with you.
exactly. I think where I was trying to go with that
Right.
is that listen to the words that people are using. It could happen. Doesn't mean
Hmm.
that it will happen.
Yes. Oh my
And
God.
so,
Yes.
so it's just really paying attention to the words that you're being given, and it doesn't. If the could and possibly are not the same as it will.
Yeah, it will, or even most likely,
Right.
because that still doesn't mean it will, but
Right.
most likely. I just want that emphasized.
Yes, and I agree. So people they really need to listen to the words
Hmm.
that are being used because the
Hmm.
words are being used selectively. There's a reason why those words are being used.
Yeah.
Um, and
Deliberate
right,
use. Yeah. Yeah.
could and should does not mean that it will.
Mm-mm. No. No. And almost means it didn't.
Right.
Near miss. Didn't happen. So, oh, thank you so much, Carrie. I appreciate this. I really loved our conversation.
No, thank
Where can
you.
people? I'm going to have all your links to put in the show notes, just to where people can find you and to highlight whatever you want to highlight. So,
I just started it, so I have like no followers.
hmm.
But I just started my Patreon page, and I can be find it. It's called Rising from the Ashes 11
Right.
11, and I also have the
Hmm.
video up there on Patreon regarding like where you can find how you can find objective media sources with that
Oh, I love
dissertation
it.
and how you can find it. Rising from the Ashes is from my own personal experience because I'm a wildfire survivor,
Right.
and so I wrote about it in my book about the recovery process
Hmm.
and what it took. So that's why my Patreon is called Rising from the Ashes because I will be promoting
Because you
my book.
you really have.
Yeah, and too, but I've also been with the fires in California, the recent ones.
Right.
I've been my aim has been to try to help these survivors through my own experience in that recovery
That's good.
process.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember. I remember talking about your book with you.
Yeah.
So, mhm. Well, when it's published, I want you to come back and
Yes.
we'll send people to your Patreon because you have lots of good information, I'm sure. Just because you just started doesn't mean it's not there. So,
It's all good.
thank you so
Well, and I
much. I
appreciate you.
appreciate
You're the
your.
one who encouraged me to do that, to get started.
Hmm.
And every time I was
Hmm.
like, and I have my own like fears, I'm like,
Of
oh
course,
no,
yeah.
could I really do this? Yeah, and you're the one who encouraged me all the way. You're just like,
That's right.
just be loud, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do
Just
it.
do it. The more of us who are doing it, we can complain about billionaires all day long.
Yeah. So,
If we're not doing something, they're the ones who have the mic. We can
yeah.
grab the mic. So,
Thank you for that. You were a great catalyst and encourager of me to take the leap, and because it's I was a reporter for many years, but I was on the side
mhm.
of like writing and reporting and gathering the information. So for me to be on this other end is a little bit
Right.
scary. It feels really.
Well, you've done it beautifully. So I'm always
Thank
glad
you.
to be a practice interviewer. I try to make it painless here. So, but
It has
thank
been. Thank
you.
you.
I'm so glad. It's so good to see you getting into action with it all. I was so
Yeah. Thank you.
excited. Alrighty, we'll
All
have
right.
you back on when the book comes out.
Thank you. Up in Flames is the name of my book.
Up in flames.
Yep.
I really love talking with the patrons because all of you guys are so cool and so interesting, and all of you have different bodies of knowledge, and we don't know that if we don't have conversations. That's one of the side bennies of Jupiter being in Gemini. It opens us up to communicating in a much wider lens. So with Jupiter and Gemini, understanding that communication is going to be maybe exaggerated as well, especially when we look at news media, any kind of media, to be honest. Being able to critically assess that is so important. So I want to thank Carri for being on the show. Right now, I think it's a really good time to talk about Angela Davis. Angela Davis has been a hero of mine since I first found out about her when my auntie told me about her back in the 1970s when I was a little girl. My auntie was a really interesting woman, and she was very, very progressive, radical. And she, she would have really grown up conversations with me when I was like 4 or 5. And she taught me a lot about Angela Davis, Malcolm X, and other people who were just trying to make people's lives better. And that's not the story we get told, but they were just trying to make sure people had quality of life at the end of the day, that people were given equal opportunity. And so let's take a look at her chart. If you don't know, actually, before we do that, let's take a look Angela Davis's biography a little bit. And I'm going to do the cliff notes. She's a political activist, a scholar, amazing scholar, brilliant woman. Um, she was so beautiful, and she still is when she was young. But I'm just going to pull this off the wiki. Uh, so, Angela Yvonne Davis was born January 26, 1944. She's an American Marxist and feminist, political activist, philosopher, academic, and author. She's a distinguished professor emerita of feminist studies and history of consciousness at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Davis was a longtime member of the Communist Party USA, CPUSA, and a founding member of the Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism. She was active in movements such as the Occupy movement and the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign. Davis was born in Birmingham, Alabama. She studied at Brandeis University and at the University of Frankfurt, where she became increasingly engaged in far-left politics. She also studied at University of California, San Diego, before moving to East Germany, where she completed some studies for a doctorate at the University of Berlin. After returning to the United States, she joined CPUSA and became involved in the second wave feminist movement and the campaign against the Vietnam War. In 1969, she was hired as an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of California's Los Angeles, so UCLA. Governing Board of Regents soon fired her due to her membership in the CPUSA. After a court ruled the firing illegal, the university fired her for the use of inflammatory language. In 1970, guns belonging to Davis were used in an armed takeover of a courtroom in Marin County, California, in which 4 people were killed. Prosecuted for 3 capital felonies, including conspiracy to murder, she was held in jail for over a year before being acquitted of all charges in 1972. During the 1980s, Davis was twice the Communist Party's candidate for vice president. In 1997, she co-founded Critical Resistance, an organization working to abolish the prison industrial complex. In 1991, amid the dissolution of the Soviet Union, she broke away from CPUSA to help establish CCDS, which is the Committee of Correspondences for Democracy and Socialism. That same year, she joined the Feminist Studies Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she became department director before retiring in 2008. Davis has received various awards, including the Soviet Union's Lenin Peace Prize and induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame due to accusations that she advocates for political violence, and due to her support of the Soviet Union, she's been a controversial figure. In 2020, she was listed as 1971 Woman of the Year and Time Magazine 100 Women of the Year edition. In 2020, she was included on Time's list of the top 100 most influential people in the world. So, what's really interesting to me is how they do try to paint her out to be a very violent figure. And if you listen to her actually talk, um, yeah, that's not, she uses thought. She's not against armed struggle. However, she is an intellectual, and so reason, structural, restructuring things so that things are more equitable and fair is important. She is somebody who can give a political critique, and you can see that some things can be both true at the same time. You can be critical of a system and want improvement without destruction. And so I very much enjoy Angela Davis's work, and let's talk about her astrology. So I'm going to share the chart. I'll make sure I get this up into, oops. I'll make sure I get this up into the Patreon. Let's see if I can. Right, I'm looking at Angela Davis's chart on astroseek.com. That is astro-seek.com. So, because she was born in late January, she's an Aquarius sun, which we know her birth time. So she was born at 5:30 in the evening. Her sun was at 5 degrees, moon at 20 degrees of Aquarius. So they're not conjunct, but they're both in the 10th house. She wouldn't have ever been able to hide no matter what. She did, learning to create safety and sanctuary is part of her life's journey, in part with having the North Node in the 4th house with the South Node in the 10th. She's a Spitfire. She's a Taurus rising, and I think she's got a very classic Taurus rising appearance, with her Mars and Uranus retrograde conjunct in Gemini in that 1st house. She was always going to be different. She was always going to be highly intellectual. She's an incredible speaker. She uses her words and her thoughts. She's very quick-witted. She defended her own self in court and won. Amazing woman. Absolutely. She is different. She stands out, and that is all throughout this chart. And yet she's grounded. When you listen to her, a lot of you say, oh, you have such a soothing voice. Listen to Angela Davis. She's that for me. I listen to her, and her voice is just so soothing, and she can say something that is just, rapier sharp, and yet it is smooth like butter. I'm sure she was a great frustration to people who like to control people, because she is uncontrollable with just her sun and moon in the 10th, but they are trine. The sun is trine her Mars and her Uranus. She would always be able to bounce back. This is a woman of deep resiliency. She has an immense amount of resiliency, being able to bounce back after challenging circumstances. She, of course, experienced a lot of violence growing up in the South as a child during the 50s. As the civil rights movement started to gain speed, everybody thinks about the 60s and the 70s, but so much more work went into it beforehand. And she e- directly experienced violence towards her family and friends. She lost friends very young when the tragedy of the bombing of the church, when the 4 little girls were killed. She was friends with them. That deeply impacted her and deeply um, caused and inspired her to do more than just wish for things to be different. I highly suggest, go onto YouTube, go on and listen to her speak, listen to the interviews that she's had. You'll be able to hear these placements so clearly. Um, her Mercury in the 9th house, again, making her just a sharp intellect and a teacher, a professor, somebody who, she would learn and she would share. She's compelled to share what she knows. She has Venus in the 8th house in Sagittarius. Um, she will leave she likes to know what other people can't find. She loves information and has a soulful approach to um, getting people's awareness open, and again, I think that's some of that smooth voice, having Venus in the 8th, having possessed that myself. And her Venus is also trine her Jupiter. And so her values driving her, and raised in a home where these values mattered, and raised in community where these values mattered. She's deeply passionate and sees the world as her family. She's a remarkable woman. Is she without flaws? No, everybody has flaws, everybody. I mean, her moon, Jupiter are opposite. She's got a temper. But you know what? You should have a temper. Everybody should have a temper, she's human. But Angela Davis is somebody, if you haven't heard of her, if you haven't heard a lot about her, go listen to her speak. She said some very wise words on Martin Luther King Day of 2025, last Monday. Go listen to her speak. Okay. She is a wise and experienced woman who has lived some life. And she, in my opinion, is part of American history, living history, that needs to be paid attention to. So thank you, thank you, Dr. Davis, because you are a remarkable woman. Alrighty. I like to believe these people listen to me. I don't know that she does. Probably not. But if you do, man, I think you're awesome. So, all right. Um, another history figure that I wanted to talk about today is Benjamin Banneker. Now, Benjamin Banneker gets touted as a intellectual astronomer, architect, designer, etc., inventor. And he was a lot like, of the time, because, in the 18th century, that was the time of the mad scientist energy, Benjamin Franklin, like, right? Well, Benjamin Banneker was Black and he was born a free man. And he was known for he made his own Farmer's Almanac, because the old Farmer's Almanac was one of many. Okay. Benjamin had his. He sent it to Thomas Jefferson. He also admonished Thomas Jefferson about slavery. And because Thomas Jefferson was saying, well, black people weren't going to be, as smart as white people. He was going on about intellectual capacities. And Benjamin Banneker was like, excuse you? Read my book. And so you can read up on Benjamin Banneker and the Smithsonian's website. You can I'll put a note in the show notes and you can look him up. But by looking at, there's not a lot of his work left because after he died, his house and all his possessions got burned. Funny enough, boy, by accident, even in America, who'd figure? But one thing that they don't talk about too much about Benjamin Banneker is Thomas Jefferson was very, very impressed with his work and recommended him to help complete the design of Washington, D.C. Because the guys who actually get the credit walked off the job and took the plans with them. Banneker had reviewed those plans, committed them to memory, and had them redrawn within 2 days. Remarkable man. We do not have his birth chart, but I think if we're going to talk about Black history, we need to talk about a Black astrologer. And he was one of, there were astrologers in America, but they're usually credited with being astronomers. But if you look at any page that exists of the ephemeris that he put, he has feast days and what the weather is going to be like and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's astrology. There's astrology. It wasn't astronomy. Astronomy and astrology weren't quite separated. They were separating out in the 17th century. Astronomers get embarrassed about us because they haven't studied it and they, have opinions about something that they haven't studied. And so, anyway, Benjamin Banneker is somebody that we often don't learn about and should. So you can look that up. His name is spelled accurately in the show notes, and I have it linked to the Smithsonian's website. That's still up. All right. Let's do some more patron shout outs, and then we will talk about dealing with some of the intense energy of this week and what we're going to do about the craziness of 2025 in the Awake Space Patreon that all supporting members are going to get to witness every single Friday. And it's going to be so fun because things can be serious out in the world. They can. But if we don't find laughter and joy, we will become depleted. And as I keep telling the patrons when we're in our chats, remember the Awake Space is a sanctuary. It's a place to come to be replenished and refilled so that we can get out and do our thing every single day. But come in to replenish, not to spread panic, not to be, clutch our pearls. I'm not saying don't feel your feelings. I'm just saying come in, spread some calm vibes, send some creative vibes. Everybody struggles in different spaces. It is overwhelming. It gets me too, guys. But if we don't kind of put our noggins together, we're all going to end up struggling instead of moving through this time period with effectiveness, deliberateness, stalwartness, and the ability to show the world that not everyone concurs with the current situation. Not everybody is in agreement. Okay. And we do that not by screaming it out into the world, but showing up and showing compassion to the people who have earned our compassion and sharing the ideals that we believe in. Well, how are we going to get through this week? Well, we've got Venus moving into Aries. We have Jupiter stationing direct. It's going to be very active energy. And I think we all need to really think about what matters most to us on an individual level. When we look at Venus in Aries, I like to think of it as a lady who knows what she wants. And that was always considered very dangerous, when we look at traditional societies that are very patriarchal. Imagine knowing what you want and what you need and how to have your needs met. Now, I've seen a lot on social media, people saying, "Oh my God, we're on our own." And I think of all of us metaphysicians who've been saying for multiple years, nobody's going to come and rescue you. Your Prince Charming isn't out there for you. Nobody's coming in on the white horse. You got to show up for yourself. You've got to show up for yourself. And so this is good energy for that, you know. And so you can't let people suck your energy dry. Okay. And in fact, again, this week on my patron only podcast, I'm going to talk about egregores and thought forms and why we all have them. There's some, I'm not going to say it's misinformation, but I think it's misexplained sometimes. So I'm going to give a very a little lesson on what thought forms are. Some people call it egregores. People love snazzy words, words like stellium and cazimi and egregore and bezor. Um, Words like that because it makes them feel good because they have a big vocabulary word. But if you don't use it with meaning, it doesn't make any sense, and that doesn't do much to inspire or empower. It does a lot to disempower. So we're going to take care of that in the Patreon this week. That's my answer to everything. It's just educating and being like, hey, you got a lot more power than you think you do. You really do. There is a lot outside of our control. There's going to be some crazy news this week. It is not going to get less crazy. Okay. It's going to get more crazy. So, first of all, we've been saying it all along, limit your news intake. Okay. I do it twice a day. I do it kind of like after I have my coffee. I do not do it first thing. I try to start my day with some positive thoughts. All right. Even if it's like, oh, wow, I have coffee. That's a positive thought. Okay. I try to find a couple things that I can be happy about. Like, oh, wow, I have great patrons. I'm a very fortunate woman. That type of thing. It doesn't have to be like, woo, big things. And then I do it again later in the day, often late at night because I'm up late and I get international news. Because remember, I have an international audience. There's people from 78 countries listening to this podcast. I have patrons from all over the world. We've got patrons from Australia, New Zealand. We've got people from Europe and Asia and South Africa. I meant South America. Gonna have to edit this one too. Anyway, we've got a lot of people from around the world who listen. So I try to look up stories that meet my global predictions. Obviously, I live in America. I talk a lot about where I live. And a lot of the people who are attracted in are Americans. By the way, in the Patreon the other night, I decided, just arbitrarily that we're going to call it the tariffs because it's, sounds classier. So now that we're subject to tariffs, but yeah. So there's that. Um, Speaking of devilish humor, every Friday night, starting this Friday, we've got a group led by one of our patrons, one of my students, Andrew, who made me messed up last Friday because he is a game master. He creates subclasses for gaming, like tabletop role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons or other systems. Anyway, he applied what he learned from me in intermediate astrology and has created a subclass that involves astrology for bards. Yeah. Yep. Astrology University for bards. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? How amazing. I don't care how you use what I teach you. I just want you to use it. I don't want you to just sit there with it like, oh, I have so much information. What a wonderful way to use it. He's an amazing GM. Absolutely great. We had our session 0 where we rolled up characters, and you guys are going to get to meet Shelby, who's a moderator in the Patreon, and we'll be reading natal charts. Damien, who is going to be reading natal charts for me. and at wokeastrology.com. Susie, who does amazing astrology consultations, and you could already book with her. Myself, my daughter Sarah, and Andrew, of course, is our GM. Oh my God, I'm editing some clips and I'm going to be putting that in the Patreon just so you guys could see what we were doing. And it's fun. And yes, we talk astrology. And it's a way to get to meet everybody who is on the reading team, but also a chance to let go for a couple hours and just laugh. And I haven't slept so well in a long time, and after gaming, and Susie said she had the same experience. Like, she's like, oh my God, I actually slept. Me too, because the world gets heavy. And when you're in a supporting role for a lot of people, if you're a helper, and Susie is a trauma informed consulting astrologer, I am as well. And when you're dealing with people going through big life changes, making big decisions, when the world is very serious like now, and on top of being a consulting astrologer, I've got a Patreon, a sizable Patreon, where there's a lot of you and one of me, and holding the energy so it remains a sanctuary. It can be a lot. It can be very tiring. So to have that laughter and fun amidst all the crap that's going on in the world, it actually was refueling and replenishing enough to get rest, real restful sleep. So you're going to love it. Just wait till I get the clips out. Super fun. And if you're a gamer, you're going to love it double. If you've always wondered what it's about, I think you're going to enjoy it. And you'll learn along the way, even if you don't want to play. Hey, who knows, maybe we'll fold laundry together. You can watch it and get your chores done, or listen to us and just laugh along with us, because I'm not gonna lie, we were pretty hilarious. So that's going to happen every Friday for members of the Patreon of $5 and up. We're going to be streaming it. We figured out a way it's going to work. I had a streaming problem this week because I thought I'd be fancy. And yeah, that backfired. The recording is up in the Patreon. Had a wonderful conversation with astrology crew member Aisling, or Aislinn. And anyway, we're going to be having more people from astrology crew come on live with me. Won't be as private as that one was. Okay. Speaking of astrology and astrology conversations, I'm going to answer a question. I think I took a screenshot of it, because the damn thing of it is the chat moves so fast that, is this it? No. Oh, here it is. I found it. There. I have an astrology question. This is from Rachel Lynn. Uranus has been making a T-square with the 1993 Saturn-Pluto square. Are we seeing events that relate to what was happening then? That is a really, really good question. So, the Saturn-Pluto square of 1993. 1993 was a really interesting year, I was pregnant with my daughter that year. And there was a lot going on in the world. Just pulling up a chart. But the Saturn square didn't last the whole year. You know that, right? Because Saturn moved back and forth. I mean, it would have been maybe within orb, but it moved. Yeah, so it was in Aquarius. Yeah, it was mostly so. It was an interesting time for sure. It's not really pinging off those points right now. But Uranus, yeah, Uranus is pinging those points. So, a lot of the policies that got us here kind of got a foothold in the early 90s. So, like, people were starting to look at deregulation It started in the 80s, but it was really getting toeholds in the 90s. Globalism was a big problem. Now, I'm an internationalist, but I'm not a globalist because globalism includes multinational corporations that have zero loyalty to a nation or a people. And whereas nations and people didn't always work out real well for the average person, and it often was better for a monarch or an oligarchy, globalism wasn't good for anybody except for a very small elite group at the top of the oligarchy, which we are seeing enacting today. Um, Pretty much since the end of the 19th century, which was kind of started the ball rolling for when we got into 1914 with World War One. I know America didn't get involved yet, but it had started before we got there. Okay, we're usually late to those parties. And it was the end of empires. And we've been undoing empire ever since. But what is happening is there is something else trying to replace it as empire. And I think what's being pinged with Uranus is it's kind of undoing all of the feasibility for any of that. We're going to have to move into a more cooperative and collective existence. Um, will we? That remains to be seen. But yeah, the 90s were really, and we were pushing forward and trying to make progress. And there was such a massive backlash against that as we moved into the 2000s. It was really hard to watch things just start to unravel because of the resistance to that. But so yeah, it is pinging that point, and it is impacting everybody born with Saturn Pluto square from 1993 in that time period. But what I'll say about that is notice society is changing. Everything you were told is real and true, and this is how power works, and this is how structures work. Notice it's not working, and it's falling apart, and that you're watching your society fall apart. You're watching the rules fall apart. You're seeing things needing to be restructured, and you were born for these times. It's uncomfortable, but you're born for these times, and it'll be interesting. Almost all of us have experienced um, Uranus opposite our Pluto in some way, because the 20th century and at least from 1930 till now, Pluto has been moving on its fastest orbit. So we have been experiencing Uranus opposite Pluto because society is restructuring very quickly and has been very quickly. In the future, it won't be as common because Pluto slows down starting now. It's going to spend 20 years in a sign. In Pisces, it's going to go to 25 years. In Aries, it'll be there for 30 years. In Taurus, it'll be there for 40 years. So there will be people who come after us that don't ever experience the Uranus Pluto opposition because they're not going to live through, we may stabilize out for a little while. There's probably going to be a lot of cautionary tales about this time period we're living in, of like, whoa, you don't want to do that. But we'll see. We'll see how humanity does. And so I would lean into Uranus being opposite your Pluto and squaring, off with your Saturn, because it's liberating you at the end of the day. It really is. It's liberating you. And those opposition squares force creativity, force different kinds of collaboration, get you out of the my way or the highway incident. It helps remove ego and needing to be in charge, but won't forcing shared interests to be what matters. And we're at the beginning phases of this. We're not anywhere close to the end game. So we all need to look at, how can we communicate and collaborate and play together in different ways in small groups and work on sustainability, and kind of let some of that bigger stuff outside of our control, kind of let it wash over us as we take care of what's right on the ground in front of us, because it'll drive you crazy otherwise. All right. I hope that answered your question. But anyway, that kind of goes for everybody. Life's changing. It's changing at rapid pace. You know, I said there would be things that were unprecedented that would surprise even me as we move through into, February and or January, late January into February. And they have. If you would have told me we would see what's going on today in the United States, it would have. I couldn't have comprehended that. It's not surprising me given the source of who it is and what they're doing with computer systems. Um, I'm a little more concerned about what they're putting into them, even more so than what they're taking out, which is very sensitive information. So don't think I'm minimizing. I'm just pointing it out. I never could have imagined that. So you can't. It's hard to call something you can't imagine, right? I don't think anybody would have gone like, "Whoa, we really?" That's so. I still think there may be interference coming up, maybe March, maybe end of February. I don't know. I would have thought there would have been interference before this, but that would be common sense. Like I was just telling Matilda this. I'm like, when you read history and you think, how could those officials been so dumb? Why didn't they stop it? Yeah, we're in one of those right now. Yes, we are. I'm hoping someone decides that it's time to not let history repeat itself so awkwardly and rhyme so poorly. So, fingers crossed. I have hope. We do end up in a better day. This isn't going to last forever. Um, I urge you to be involved in your state and local level as much as possible. If all you can do is be a friend of the library, that's a very powerful thing to be. One of my greatest achievements in life was being part of a community effort to get a library built in a rural area that really needed one. And for everything else I've done in life, knowing that there's a library that young and old alike can go and find refuge in bad weather because it's near the bus station, where they can have a place to meet a friend, where they can be entertained, where they can find education, where they can learn how to use computers. One of my favorite things was this old guy coming in. He was in his 90s. And he came in and he said, my grandkid said I have to learn how to use the googly machine. And that was when we had the pilot project. And I'll never forget him saying, learn the googly machine. And we had librarians there who were more than willing to help him learn how to use the googly machine. And that was 20 years ago. That was actually, that was 20 years ago. That was during the pilot project. So, um, so proud to be able to do that. Do things you'll be proud of, you know. On an individual level, I would make sure you stock up a little bit on food. It does not mean you blow all of your money on a pantry, but just make sure you have things that you can use. This isn't to scare you. It's just always good to have extra. I grew up that way. My daughter jokes that we're, just a just this side of a bunker, but it's not. My family always prepared for, whatever. My dad worked in emergency services. We lived in the Pacific Northwest where you could have really bad storms or power outages. And, we like to be comfortable. So we don't like to go short on food. And knowing how to put things away is really important. So, you know um we still just the three of us because I'm with my parents because they're elderly and I'm enjoying time with them, and that wasn't always the case. If you're a patron, I talk about it. um we've got lots of toilet paper, not hoarding, but just plenty. We've got all the cleaning supplies we could need. We have extra coffee because I got some hydroponic garden supplies because I think that it's going to get real expensive to have things like lettuce and tomatoes um, as we move through the year. And we're not going to need to buy a ton, but a little hydroponic garden is going to be fine, like an arrow garden, tabletop thing. So it's up to you. And you can get involved with a CSA, you can get involved with a community pea patch or community garden. You can buy from local farms or people with, farmer stands, going to farmers markets. You can pool your resources together as friends. Like maybe you don't have a lot of money, and you're like, well, I'd love to be a patron, but I can't. But maybe you have a friend and you both work really hard. Maybe you can put grocery money together so you can split it up, because maybe you don't need a big head of lettuce. Maybe you could just split it, right? If you're both single and living by yourself, you don't have kids. It's time to come together as we move through these next few months, especially. Okay. So I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be tough to watch. Okay, um, but we'll get through it. We will, and it's important to draw your energy in and recall your energy as much as possible. And you can just say, you don't have to run spells, you don't have to light candles. If it helps you focus, absolutely do it. But you can literally just declare, I recall all of my energy from anyone that I have cast it out to, or to anyone, or from anyone who has tried to take it from me. And I take back all of my energy for my highest good. Period. And then you'll feel a lot more solid inside. Now is a great time to do that. Okay. And if you are a patron, remember the chats are a place to restore and revitalize and be a sanctuary. Let's support one another. Okay. I'll talk to you next week.